Hi. I'm Ryan. I'm a teacher here at Fox. And thank you for allowing me to share this time with you and to start the day. Whenever I give a workshop or present something, I always like to acknowledge that we're all teachers. There's a lot of expertise in the room, and I think that any one of us would make amazing use of this half an hour to share. And I'm looking forward to learning from some of you and some of the workshop as we go. But it's just a real honor to be asked, and thank you so much for allowing me to share this time this morning to start us off. I often like to start anything I do by just acknowledging the context we're on. And here at Terry Fox, we're on unceded Coast Salish land. We sometimes say it's home of the Stolo, which means river people, and we're kind of on Coquitlam land as well. And that's sort of the context for which we teach, we live, we play, and we're going to have some of the good conversations that we're going to have today. I want to, because I'm starting the day, it's not just starting for my session, but for the day. Some of us know each other very well, some of us don't, and I want to just take a few minutes to give you the opportunity to turn to someone and share a little bit. I want you to just turn to someone, you can know them or not, and just talk about two things. The first thing is one thing that you failed at in the last year. That's the first thing. Whoa, nerves? No? Hopefully, mine won't be this next half an hour. The other thing is, let me share a memory of when you felt really connected to someone and what that actually felt like. You've got 2 minutes. Go ahead, please. With someone who's like a little more open and who has a loud voice, would someone be willing to share just one thing that they failed at over the last year? Any volunteers? You're just like my class.
My partner failed at teaching Macbeth.
Teaching Macbeth. That is a good thing to fail at, yeah? You know, thank you for volunteering your partner. One of the things that we kind of find out about that when we think about like things we failed at is that maybe we learn something a little bit from that failure more than actually like getting it right the first time, right? And that's part of kind of learning and teaching and life, and it's something that we're all kind of discovering. That's the first thing. Would anyone be able to offer a time when they felt really connected to someone else, to some other people, and what that felt like? Looking for an English teacher with lots of adjectives. Yes. What's your name? What's your
Jerry Tompkins.
And you're from Paris?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I had a group of art students who I had taught since grade 9, and I knew a lot of them from grade 9 all the way. They took my class all the way through until grade 12, and I just had a really sort of honest relationship with them, and I was able to have fun with them and have real conversations with them, and it felt really natural and like fun.
You're almost like a plant. I didn't expect that, but that story kind of like illustrates kind of the thing I want to pull out, and one thing I want to like explore over the next half an hour. That like something that we all know, we've kind of been like talking about in education for a long time, which is the importance of connection, right? And connection can do a lot of different things, and it can kind of help us learn things. It can give us courage. It can allow us to have conversations we wouldn't have had, and it allows us to be open to things that maybe we weren't open to. And I hope that as you talked about those things with someone by you, you kind of like had that feeling of, oh, there's something that was different happening when I felt connected to someone else. And the importance of connection is something we've talked about more and more in teaching, or at least I've talked about more in the last 10 years. at the same time we're doing connection, something else that's sort of emphasized a little more, or in equal measure, and it's kind of tension between those things, which is safety. And an emphasis on, this is my thesis for the day, because oftentimes we talk about safety, we've heard people talk about like safe spaces or whatever that is. And I think this movement towards safety and connection is one of the big themes, not just in teaching, but in parenting and all that type of stuff. And while I would argue that safety is an important concept and we should pay attention to it, I don't think anyone in this room would argue that schools, classrooms, or relationships should be unsafe. I would argue that at this time in our profession and maybe in North America, the balance between safety and connection is a little bit askew, and it tends to be misunderstood by both its strongest advocates and most vehement detractors. And I want to kind of explore what that is for me, or some of the ideas I've been chewing on a bit, and that's what I want to spend the next half an hour on. I want to look at it in kind of three areas that I've been thinking about in my life and my teaching, but not just my teaching, my life in general. One of them is mental health and trauma. We've talked about this all the time in our schools, and we've all come up with it in our jobs in some way. The second is how we learn, how we teach, and the kind of traps we fall into, the mistakes we make, and our tendencies. And the last one is looking at kind of accountability, transformation, and how to move us all forward together. And I think connection is a big part of that. So an emphasis on safety is really rooted in conversations or ideas about mental health, more than anything else, and that comes with a certain history. Does anyone actually know where the idea of the safe space first came up? I feel justified. I feel like I'm justifying my existence right now, which is good. Safe spaces first started in American LGBTQ bars in the 1960s. When LGBTQ folks who were under the constant threat of violence, like being physically beat up, being physically hurt or killed, as well as being in an environment where they were harassed, it was meant for people with one identity, in this case LGBTQ folks, to have a little bit of a rest from the craziness and threats of society. They were private places, and they were created as a temporary respite from violence in a world full of complex trauma. And those safe spaces do play a very important role. I'm going to talk about why I think we can't stay there, but when you're in a state of trauma, something physical happens to you. Your body reacts in specific ways. There are two types of general trauma. One is single. That's a single incident. Maybe you're in a car crash. You're I just can't get over this car crash. It's a single one. Or it's complex, or something happens to you over and over and over again. It's a little more deep-seated. An example of that might be if someone is in a media environment which tells them that their body is supposed to be a certain way, and bombards them with images over and over again on a daily basis, that might lead to an eating disorder. Our body has really serious reactions to this. It produces cortisol, which is a stress hormone, which is sort of bad for you, and it can lead to two types of things. One of them is hyperarousal, where you're sort of oversensitive, or you have strong reactions to things which are not life-threatening. And the other is disassociation, which is a form of numbing. And people react in different ways. And what safety can do is kind of be a temporary protection and reduce your cortisol levels so you can actually do other things. I've actually had first-hand experience with this, and I've talked with some people about this, but for many of you this is a new story. But for almost a year in my 20s, I fell into a pretty deep and continuous cycle of depression. It was sort of triggered by a bad relationship situation, but it was actually rooted in kind of forms of racism that I'd been navigating my entire life as a Canadian Asian male in Canada. At the time, I didn't think I would ever come out of it. I actually thought it was going to be the new normal for me until the end. 4 months into that year, that depression and anxiety led to what's called the dissociation depersonalization disorder, where your body is under such constant stress and anxiety that your brains and emotions and sense of self start to detach from your lived experiences. I felt numb all the time, and it seemed like I wasn't experiencing things directly in my life, but I was kind of like watching myself from camera as I was walking through my life. It's kind of like when you're in so much pain, you numb out from the pain. Does that make sense? So here's the thing. For those of you who know me, it's going to be no surprise that I identify as more left of center.
Really?
No. But the truth is, the modern progressive safe space didn't help me with my depression for all sorts of reasons. But that chapter of my life is behind me now. So what helped me move past that time? It wasn't safety. It was actually connection. Social connection is a buffer to anxiety and depression. Connection, and by extension attachment, for those of us who know attachment theory, helps to be resilient. Connection tends to be empowering and lets you find your voice. Safety can mitigate stress responses, but it doesn't actually heal you from trauma, right? Being connected to other people does. This is a picture from my journal, which is just me scribbling on things. In terms of how I've thought about this over the years. And we in North America are weird. We're all weirdos, right? Yeah. If you don't think we're weirdos, this is going to come up later in what I'm going to talk about. But we're actually some of the most individualistic, in some ways disconnected people in the entire world. They've actually done a study of this at UBC. It's a 20-page paper if you want to read it. And it's called The Weirdest People in the World, and they're talking about us. Our individualistic tendencies have led to a crisis of connection, some people are calling that, and an incredibly palpable mental health crisis. In the US, 1 in 4 people have no one to share a personal problem with. And loneliness, isolation, alienation, these are the reasons that people seek counseling or mental health things. And they're also linked to things like violent behaviors, suicide, and all that kind of stuff. They've actually found that being lonely tends to light up the brain that usually codes for things like physical pain as well. So there is it feels physical even if it's not. And when people don't have authentic forms of connection, they tend to settle for and medicate themselves with whatever authentic kinds they can find. Whether it be drugs, addiction, alcohol, social media, sex, and unhealthy situations, whether that be emotionally or physically. We've all heard of Gabamate say something about this, and maybe there's some truth to that. So, despite all the stereotypes that may be associated with me, identifying as a politically progressive, social justice millennial with my avocado toast and my fixie bikes, which I may or may not have. I'm not telling you all my secrets. I actually don't talk about safe classrooms in my class, but I do focus a lot on connection and attachment. I try to create spaces where my students feel supported in taking risks, which is different from safety. And as a result, I've had lots of students talk to me and disclose things to me about suicide, depression, eating disorders, sexual assault. And I actually know I'm not unique in this. We all have our own stories because all of us are connected with kids in some way, in different ways. But I think that students disclose that to our teachers, not because we're safe, it's just because we have a connection to them, which is a little bit different. And one of the things I think we as teachers can do in our practice is to help shift the focus from safety, this pendulum, this tension that swings, is to shift how we respond to people who are struggling. we often try to comfort people in our lives by saying, it's going to be okay. To be honest, when people said that to me during my depression, it was one of the ways that I knew they didn't actually understand what was going on. But also, you can't guarantee that. What you can say is that I'm here and that you matter to me in this moment. Those are words of connection you can actually follow through on in the moment, no matter what happens. You can't assure them that their dad's not going to find another job or something like that. And oftentimes people don't disclose things to you, whether they be students or partners or whatever. They don't disclose things to you because they want you to fix them. It's because they want to be seen. They want to be heard. And maybe they want to be held emotionally or have space held for them with another human being. So trauma and mental health are a big part of why I think connection is more important than safety. But at the end of the day, most of us are not counselors. I'm not a counselor. That's not the main part of our job. You know, if that happens, I send them to their counselors. But connection also has a crucial role in how we learn, the extent that we can and can't talk about things with each other, or their students can talk about things with each other, and the cognitive traps we sometimes fall into. I think this is often framed incorrectly as a debate between safety and free speech, often between the left and the right. And I think both of that dichotomy is sort of wrong. But wherever you fall in this debate, I think there's one thing that we can probably agree on. And that's that polarization is about disconnection. When we don't talk about each other, that's disconnection. In this time where we're recognizing that polarization and what we call identity tribalism is a real problem and something that we need to pay attention to. Especially as teachers in schools, where we work with staff, families, and students who are diverse, not just in terms of race and gender and sexual orientation, but in terms of political beliefs and values. I have no assumptions about how people in this room had voted in the last provincial election. I'm not even confident which hockey team people like in this room. Maybe that's a little more divisive. And I think sometimes people can blend the idea of safety into comfort, and that makes it even worse. But polarization can also lead to echo chambers, both in real life and online life. You know, we kind of hang out with people who think like us. And although, you know, bleeding heart liberals get kind of the safe space label on this, it's sort of an equal opportunity thing, I think. This is a map of the internet. How pretty, ooh, map of the internet. It shows the connection or lack thereof between people of different political stripes on social networks. The red dots are the more conservative people, the blue dots are the more liberal, and because of the internet algorithms and how filter bubbles work, they don't interact very much. So depending on what your social media feed is like, you might think everyone is talking about this, or I'm going to share that thing, it's going to get to the right people and it's going to change the conversation. Most of the times on the internet, at least, it just gets to the people who already sort of agree with you. And it's with this polarized mindset that we often debate on things. Seeing discussions as a zero-sum game where in order to win, the other person has to lose. And this is this mindset where if someone on the blue side wins, the red side has to lose. I remember talking with Brenda Precisionik about this. Brenda, are you here?
She's not here, she's got the flu.
Oh no, okay, well, I'll look at Dave then. Brenda and I, Brenda's sort of the bridge between our schools. She was working at Heritage and we were both teaching SK-12. And she sent me an email and said, man, Ryan, in my SK-12 class, they just want to debate all the time. And I was like, yeah, it's sort of what we've trained them to do. Yeah? We've trained them to win and lose and to not see it as like going someplace together, which is the more connected thing, right? This type of identity tribalism and echo chambers can also exacerbate something called confirmation bias, which is the tendency to search for, interpret, favorite, and recall information in ways that already confirms what we want to believe or what we already believe. For example, if I think that the Canucks are the best hockey team in Canada, for some reason, maybe I'm more likely to pay attention to news articles that say because of a new trade, because of a new coach, because we have better colors than the other. This is finally going to be our year, folks. Finally going to be our year. Maybe that's disconnected from reality. Confirmation bias can blind us to objective facts and prevent us from seeing the world as it is, or as it fully is. Here's an example to illustrate this. Just think about this. I want you to imagine an ear of corn. Don't talk, just think about it. What does it look like? What's the texture? What's the color? What does it feel like? What does it taste like? Got it? Okay? Did it look like that? Who imagine that in some way? Did anyone imagine this? You're ahead of the curve. Yeah. It's not that the first image is wrong. It's just that it's incomplete. It's part of the truth, but it's not the whole truth. We can do the same thing with toilets. Here's the toilet we all thought about. Here's the other toilet. Yeah? Most of the world uses this one, by the way. We are the weirdos. We're the weirdest ones in the world. Yeah. And breaking these things open is important because it makes us realize that in order to understand the full body of truth, we actually need to connect ourselves to multiple perspectives and experiences. But if we assume that there are multiple truths, we also have to have the wisdom to understand that some things are more true than others, and the truth is connected to a context. And these are the things that we as teachers can sometimes forget about in the effort to be fair and balanced. We're often encouraged from parents, from colleagues, from district people, from society at large, to be neutral in our classrooms. And this is rooted from like a real place. It's a good conversation because it recognizes that us as teachers have a lot of power and authority in influencing our students, and that comes with a really important responsibility. But if we're not careful, when we pursue balance, or if we look at multiple perspectives in a disconnected way from a context, we can fall into a trap called false equivalence. Here is an example of false equivalence. I'm hoping that those of us who are not math teachers can still see that this is wrong. I'll give you a second. It's false equivalence is when we treat two things as the same, or equally good or equally bad when they are not. And this can result in really bad consequences when it's disconnected from things like the context of power or how science actually works. And I would argue that most people don't actually understand how science works, how to look at scientific studies and the body of scientific studies. This is a video from John Oliver that kind of illustrates that.
Think of it this way. This is a chart mapping the results of studies of things like coffee, eggs and wine. All of them have been linked to raising or lowering your risk of cancer depending on the study. And everything causes cancer is not the conclusion you want to draw from science. It's the conclusion you should draw from logging onto WebMD, where that is their motto. Because if I were to tell you about each of those studies in isolation, at some point you might reasonably think, well, no one knows anything about what causes cancer. And that is a problem. Because that's the sort of thing that enabled tobacco companies for years to insist the science isn't in yet. And if you think I'm exaggerating about the impact that this misreporting can have on our faith in science, look at an example from some of the people most guilty of it. Because the Today Show, which lives for scientific studies, recently concluded one segment like this.
Like a lot of studies that we love around here, there have been a couple, especially related to women, about the benefits, as I get all serious, on whole milk. Hey, whole milk, but it's true.
There's a lot of research, though, that says actually having whole milk or having whole fat dairy products actually can help you lose weight.
I think the way to live your life is you find the study that sounds best to you.
No. In science.
Okay, so my reaction is the same as John Oliver's there. No, we cannot do that. Truth actually looks a little more like this. If you go to the next slide then. Then the next slide is what we call the spectrum of truth, where it's not that all things are true. Some things go from left to right. There are no students here, so I can use the word bullshit, right? Yeah? Okay. When we have debate that's disconnected from... If we're having a lot of debates, what's the opposite of that? And that's oftentimes dialogue. And it's worth thinking about how we can have some more dialogues where we actually listen to each other and based on certain understandings. And one of those understandings is the context of power. Sometimes when we want to have conversations that present two things as if they're equal, while totally ignoring the social context of power. And we can talk about this or kind of mitigate this by talking explicitly about confirmation bias, identity tribalism, the spectrum of truth, and what science actually is. Oftentimes giving space to two perspectives is not enough. In the connected space, we realize that tension and dissonance are a necessary part of dialogue, growth, and authenticity. But we also need to come to a mutual understanding together. We see dialogue not as about winners or losers, but how to move forward. If we talk about connection, it's really a place to have courageous conversations, which is different than safe spaces. So I maybe have 3 minutes just to kind of wrap up, but the last thing I want to talk about is, I'll start by saying something that's incredibly obvious to us all, which came back to Mick Macbeth, I think, is that in order to learn, we need to fail first, right? And that's something which a lot of students are really scared of, both in their learning but also in their accountability. I'm actually harping on this more with my Asian students. And you can tell them that Mr. Cho says there's no such thing as an Asian fail, which is an 86%. No such thing, right? In fact, I'm an arts teacher as well. And one thing I keep telling people is that if you want to make good art, you need to make a bunch of mediocre art first. Yeah? And one thing which is what it told me in my first year of teaching, the key to creating great lesson plans is to deliver a bunch of mediocre ones and tweak it every time. I'm a little upset I only get to do this talk once, by the way. But that's my own thing to learn. Bo Burnham talks about this, and maybe just a short clip of Bo Burnham. If people don't know Bo, he's a comedian that's gotten pretty famous, but he started when he was 16.
I'm happy to be an example of someone. I have offensive things that I am very proud of being able to be here, and every video I posted allowed me to be here, and I wouldn't touch a single thing because of the butterfly effect. I wouldn't be able to be here, but I'm very grateful to, all the moments led to this moment. But it's embarrassing. Some of them are embarrassing. Some of them are, 2006, 16-year-old trying to be edgy. It's that's a little homophobic. It's literally racially insensitive. And I'm happy to be an example of someone that failed out loud publicly in a certain way and was hopefully able to evolve and get past that. And I do worry that kids don't have that freedom anymore. They don't have the freedom to fail out loud, because a huge part of being anything, not just being creative, is failing and trying things and feeling in the dark and going, oh, that's a wall, okay, I don't go past there, and there were some stoves on, you know what I mean? I'm just stretching metaphors left. No, I get it. It's like, you're gonna say some wrong, you have to be able to atone for that. If you're a kid, you have to be given the
No, the fear of seeing entire lives wiped out because a mistake is revealed.
yeah, especially if it's a kid, a 17-year-old. You know what I mean? Like, that's the other thing though about the current moment that's so difficult, but is correct.
So this idea of like failing and taking risks for things like learning and accountability. Some of us know about attachment theory. If you haven't heard about it, so worth exploring. But for those who don't know, it's this idea that the more connected we are to people, that's why I asked you that question before, the more willing we are to be brave and take risks. Babies who feel more connected to their mothers or their parents tend to crawl a little further from their mothers because they don't feel like insecure that the mom's going to disappear. And this can help us be accountable when we do something wrong, because sometimes it feels safer not to say when we did something wrong than it is to actually kind of do the connected thing, which is this in the last 1 minute. This is something which just showed up recently, where I identify as a leftist, and a lot of leftists got this story, either wrong or incomplete, let's say. Right now there's a lot of people in the media are saying, what can we do to actually acknowledge this and talk about it? And what's been really impressive for me to see over the last week is a bunch of my friends who identify as leaning one way come out after this and say, hey, look, I was wrong on this one. I'm sorry, I need to own up and be accountable for it. And isn't that the connected thing? And isn't that the thing we want to teach our students to do too? This idea of connection. I got one more. I think most of us who are teachers got into teaching not because we like summer vacation or love the quadratic equation, though it's cool. It's cool. But most of us got into this because we want to make a difference in some ways. This is a quote from my friend Iglinka. Some people treat the task of trying to make the world better as a sprint. Others see it as a marathon. But I don't think it's either. I think it's actually a relay race. And a relay race is about connection. And that's something that we can all try to talk about and how we want to do this relay race together. So if a student goes from Mr. Cathcart's class to my class to Ms. Mizuko's class, what is the connection that we can bring to all of them? Or if a student comes from Fox, goes to Heritage Woods, what's the connection that we can make between those schools so that a student can benefit from the mental health stuff, from the learning stuff, from the accountability stuff, from the modeling stuff, and from growing up stuff. So thank you for allowing me to share this time with you guys.